Back in the 1980s, North Americans would gather around the television on Saturday night to watch the Carol Burnett Show, which was full of music and slapstick comedy and crazy stuff right off the page. And at the end of a whirlwind program every night, she would sing, "I'm so glad we had this time together to have a laugh or sing a song. Seems we only just get started when it's time to have to say so long." And then she'd pull her ear like that, you see. Well, where did the time go? This is the last Sunday, and then I cross a border again from a coddled and loved and generous welcome back to the broad land in which I live, where anything can happen and does. And I was thinking about crossing that border, and I realized it must be very interesting to be an island continent, because you don't have borders. Well, I mean, the sea is obviously the border, and when you go elsewhere, you have to pass through customs and so on. But Australia itself, being an island continent, is just one massive country. Of course, in Canada, where I live, we live cheek by jowl with the United States of America, and from my home, it's an hour to the border. And I have a real thing about the border. I've been known to cluck like a chicken in the back seat as we get near the border, and my hands sweat, and I feel guilty for things I haven't even done. Because when you cross the border between the flags, you're in the hands of whoever happens to be working in that little booth. What if he or she has had a bad day? What if you're the 25th person and they pick on every 25th? I remember crossing with a friend one time on their way to an American university. My friend was from a foreign country and spoke with a rather thick accent, and the man leaned in the window and said to him, "Where were you born?" And he said, "Toronto." And the man said, "No, you weren't. Where were you born?" He said, "Honduras." He said, "Why did you say Toronto?" He said, "I didn't." I thought, oh my God, I'm a dead man. We haven't even crossed the border yet. And we were so confused, we missed the parkway going south, the freeway, and pulled off into a side street in Buffalo, New York, and at a red light rolled down the window and said to the man in the car, "Could you please tell us the way to the freeway?" And he said, "No." Crossing the border. Well, when you cross the border, you move from an intentional particular, like this experience is for me, back into the general flow, and it involves sorting and packing and checking loose ends and making sure you didn't leave anything in the refrigerator at the hotel, and make sure you tore up all your little sales slips and put them in the trash. And then you savor all this, and then you gear up to prepare for all that, the crossing of the border. And there are always issues around re-entry, aren't there? Of course, it's a long flight, as you can imagine, to where I live, about 15 hours to Los Angeles, and then a 3-hour sit in the airport, and then 4.5 hours into Toronto, and then check through customs and get in the little limousine and go home and clean out the cat litter, which is the first job my wife has given me when I return home. There's all the business of filling out the forms. You remember it. They give it to you on the aircraft. What's the flight number? What's your passport number? Where have you come from? Have you touched any farm animals in the last few weeks? And especially flying out of Australia, they will say, "Have you been bitten by anything larger than 3 meters?" You see, that's the question. And then they will ask you, "Do you have anything to declare?" And that's a very good question, because when you cross a border, it's time to discern whether you have anything to declare. Has anything happened to you from one side to the other? And what do I bring back with me from this experience, they will ask. And I'm bringing back Dr. McNabb with me. I'm taking him back in my mind. I can't help it, just as you can't help taking Dr. McNabb back in your mind. Last week, some of you may remember, he read a version which he had written of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, "If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels but have not love," and it was beautiful. And I said to him, "That was remarkable. Where is it?" And he said, "Well, it's in one of my books, Hungry for Love. Do you have the book?" And I said, "No, I don't." "Well, here's the book," he said, and he gave it to me. And I went home that night and I read it cover to cover, and I made notes to myself. And the next day I said to him, "How did you do that?" He said, "Well..." So I thought, I'm going to have to write a book now. Thank you for that. We have in the chancel of our church, up among the organ facade, 5 little church mice, just carved ones. They started as one and then another, and then someone else gets the idea and another. So we have Morley the Methodist mouse, and we have George the Anglican mouse from St. George's Chapel in Windsor in England. And then we have Elijah, the little mouse that stands over where people read the text. He's a showman for sure. And then we have Jacob hiding somewhere from the Mennonite communities north of Toronto. I can hardly find him even when I know where he is. And then we have little Anna Magdalena, a little sleeping mouse named after the wife of J.S. Bach. She was brought back from Germany, and she sits right on the edge of the pulpit asleep, so that I don't pound it too hard and wake her. And the mice were so getting out of hand that I had our original carver carve me a cat. And the cat is about this tall, and beautiful green eyes and whiskers, and I put him up just where you can see him if you know where to look. I don't want the place to look like Disneyland, but there needs to be a bit of wistfulness in it, you see. And I have employed those mice and the cat in baptismal services and so on, where you acknowledge the various traits of those little mice in your life who are watching you, the curious ones, the fun ones, the delightful ones, and over it all a great cat who smiles upon us and keeps general order and so on, and the people actually get it. They say that was a very interesting way to do the ceremony. So I was thinking about the book. It could be called Of Mice and Amen. And the subheading would be, For Modern Clergy Just Squeaking By. Do you think that would work? Now, I probably won't write it because I'll run out of energy having gone through the title and so on, but you, will be in my mind and will probably push me from this great distance. One of the questions they ask you at the border, and I think it's a good question, is, are you bringing back any gods with you? And this is the Jacob question: choose you this day whom you will serve, whether it's the gods of the land from which you came, or the gods in the land in which you now dwell, or the gods of your own family, the ones you carry with you. Are you bringing any gods back with you? And I realized that we do create our own deities. It doesn't mean there isn't a deity there. It doesn't mean there isn't something in the mystery. There is. But we take portions of it like clay and water, and we spin it like a potter on a wheel, and we gather before us the kind of deity we need in which to carry our lives. And sometimes along the way our lives expand and the pots crack, and you need to form other deities. So people are setting down aspects of their deity and lifting up others, and the whole thing is in wondrous flux. It was true in ancient Israel. The god Elohim and so on, became so vast and so timelessly above everything that the culture began to need a god or a description of a deity whose characteristics were closer to their own lives, times of battle and times of change. And so the aspect of Yahweh, the warrior god, was raised among them. For a long time, that was the deity when the state and the tribes were at war. And then there came a longing for deep clarity, for voices to speak. And so people began to look for the return of Elijah, the great prophet, the one whose place of birth was not exactly known and who was a desert person who just whisked in and out of people's lives. But the longing for that kind of mysterious anchorage rose up, and people still in Israel look for the coming of Elijah, the voice of wisdom underneath all the din. And then, as we know, our tradition comes out of a yearning for Messiah, that embodiment of the sacred that will take us from our need to our desire, that will take us from our distance to our nearness. And so a yearning for a great messianic presence was being felt. We change our deities as we need them. Nothing wrong with that. That's the creativity of the human spirit. So I was thinking of the deities from the land from which I first arrived. Did I bring any deities with me from Canada, my homeland? Well, of course, I see the deities there in my habits and in my particular culture. But I've come to realize, being among you again, that no nation has the corner on piety or goodness or inventiveness or on trouble. That all of us are on the same human adventure, no matter where we are in the world. I remember once a young Muslim woman coming into the church and speaking to me for a few moments, and she was weeping, and she began to tell me about her life. She was new to the country, and she left her family back home, and she was feeling that she wasn't getting along well. And the analogy that seemed to work was that the bowl out of which she had been fed over a long, long time had become too small for the life she was now experiencing. So we talked a while about the necessity of putting down that bowl and holding your hands out in expectation until another bowl is shaped for you, in which you will begin to pick up the things you need for your nourishment. And on another day, two young people, a brother and sister, came in from the hospital across the street. I happened to be going through the church, and they said to me, "Our father has just died in the hospital, and we want to know two things. Is he all right? And will we ever see him again?" And we talked for a long time about that, and I realized those are the two questions. And they're the questions in every country in the world. Bowls get too small. Will I ever be fed again? I lose those whom I love. Are they all right in the mystery? Will I ever see them again? That is a universal language of a universal people. Have you brought deities with you from the land in which you've been recently dwelling? Aha, from this land am I taking deities back with me? Well, I realize difference. Oh, we're considerably alike. We share a similar sense of humor, and we share a joy of life. I have found, as have others, that the Australians whom I have met are incredibly joyful people, ready for anything on most days. We share that. But there are differences. There are ways in which your tribe is not exactly the same as mine, and it's wonderful to consider. Take footy, for example. Footy to me has become like an evening of Gaelic singing. You love the tune, but you don't recognize any of the words. And so I would tune in for 5 minutes of footy in the afternoon on the television, and I would say, "Yes, I've got it." No, I haven't got it. But when I realized that 100,000 people in Melbourne gather to watch it, I realized that there is a sacred thing happening here, and we dare not as visitors abuse the sacredness of others. So I acknowledge you in this deity, and I listen to you hum your Gaelic tunes, and I smile sweetly, saying, "I wonder what's happening there." I was looking up the largest pipe organ in the world, just for fun, on the internet, and it's in First Congregational Church, Los Angeles, California. It has 20,500 pipes, and if you tune in on YouTube, you can hear it being played. They play Elgar's Nimrod. So I punched up the church itself just to get a hint of what it was like, and there was the minister giving the welcome. "We are a journeying church. You're going to like us here. We ask all kinds of questions. We don't have very many answers so far, but you're welcome to," the kind of good thing. Well, the vitriolic remarks that were being thrown up on the website under that. "Your journey isn't my journey, buddy. Blah, 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 blah. Only in Christ Jesus will we..." And on and on. It was such caustic vitriol. The man was only giving a welcome. And yet, each of us has our own sacred buttons, and if someone steps on our sacred button, then from some place of anonymity, we can fire a bomb across the room and take the person. I was stunned by it. So much so, I'm taking the welcome off the Metropolitan website unless we get one. Well, what about the deities inside you, they say? The ones you carry with you from tribe and family. Is there anything to express about that? The things you assume and rarely examine, they're just there every day. The gift of jet lag is wonderful, because you wake up at the weirdest hours and you're lying there in the dark all by yourself, and your mind begins to speak to you in ways that it didn't before. I realized how much I was missing my wife. Well, that's not a strange thing, except I was able to see the whole of my wife from a distance, not the little parts you deal with every day, just my wifeness of my wife there in my mind. And I got a perspective. I was looking at, it's like looking at a great mountain from a hillside far away without having to climb the thing every afternoon. And it was quite delightful to realize how wonderful my wife is from a distance. So I'm grateful for jet lag from that. I hope she will be, I'm in trouble here, aren't I? I hope she will be wonderful when I get home as well, but I'm rapidly losing hope. And it's interesting to have your mind go off the leash in the middle of the night. It's out of control. So I would find myself saying to my mind, once we were in Barbados, do you remember the hotel? Just take me back to the beach along which we walked. And suddenly the beach is there, and I'm actually walking along the beach, and I can feel the sand between my... I don't spend a lot of time doing that at home where I work, but in this other land, the inner deities, the little things that are significant to me, begin to speak in a different way. That was quite wonderful to know. I should just tell you something of what I'm heading back into so you'll know my terror. I received an email from our front office executive when I first arrived, and it was handed to me before last Sunday's service, and it made me smile. This is what you may want to keep me after this, and I may want to stay. Don't worry about anyone using your office. We moved your sofa and coffee table into the hall where everyone can use them. And a few of your robes in case we get a bit chilly. I pulled out the big comfy chair for myself. Oh, New York called. They're casting a part on Broadway for an Elvis impersonator who works as a minister by day. Deadline to book auditions was yesterday. Since it's the first long weekend of summer, we put a picture of a case of beer on the Sunday bulletin cover. Knock 'em dead down there. Well, that's something of the world into which I go. Is there any power or strength in the other land once you cross the border, once you step out of the church life and the church rhythm back into the big world? Is there any strength and encouragement and netting under us as we go? That's the question, stepping from the small into the big. Well, the biblical writers at their best seem to indicate that indeed there is. It's not religious particularly, it's just experiential. People build it into religions and knock each other around over their definitions of it, but beneath it, it is simply what the Bible calls wisdom. It appears to us in our work and in our habits and in our friendships. It gently speaks to us and guides us. When we fall down and skin our knees and stand up, wisdom begins to speak to us again, and it's just simply there, and we feed from it and can trust it. And the Bible says several things about it. One is that its nature is feminine. Isn't that interesting? Being written in a patriarchal society, and in a culture in which male priests and so on ran the show, this writer of wisdom literature dares to suggest that this gift at the center of the world that anchors us every day is feminine in nature. Somehow it is the guardian woman, the ethereal mother, the compassionate, tenacious, brave, perceptive, insistent, feminine. Do you live with that? Do you know what that's like? I had a woman in my congregation in her 80s. Her name was Grace, and she was my Rottweiler. I'd known her in other congregations, and she followed me along the way. And every week she would come down to the church with her little cloth and her little bottle of lemon oil, and she would polish the pulpit every Sunday. You'd slide off the thing, it was so richly polished. And whenever I seemed to be up against something, she would circle around whoever it was with me, snarling. It was quite wonderful. But she would call you on things as well. If you didn't visit her regularly enough, you'd hear about it. And if you said things that went against her understanding of life, she would tell you straight up front. She was from Aberdeen, and she used to remember when she was 5 years old, going down the street with a shilling and buying gumballs and hard candies. And she said, on my way back past the houses, and she'd name the houses of everybody who lived there, you'd be sucking this little round candy, and the different color layers would come off, and in the center was a little bit of licorice, and it was quite wonderful. I said, why is it that you can recall the candies you ate when you were 5 years old, and you don't remember the $10 you owe me from last week? And she said, well, an 88-year-old woman can't remember everything. It is remarkable to be pursued by an amazing grace, as I was. This grace meets us on the road. Wisdom meets us on the road, says the text, in the heights, in the depths, at the crossroads, in the cul-de-sacs, wherever we are, this matrix of support and reality is always with us. A few years ago, my wife and I went with friends to Dumfries and Galloway in the south of Scotland, and we stayed in a little shieling just along the road from Dundrennan Abbey, a beautiful abbey ruin. And in the afternoons, I would walk up the road to the little cemetery. It was a stone-walled fence, and I'd climb over the stile, and I'd sit on a bench inside the walls for 20 minutes just to read a book. And you could see the ocean from there. You could see England across the Sound. But on about the third day, I began to realize where I was. I was sitting among the tombstones of Scots going back hundreds of years. I was the only one there. And eventually, I would walk among the tombstones and read the writing on them. The lives these folk had lived, lost numbers of children. Some of them died in the wars. And then I began to speak to them on about day 4. And put my hands on the stones, and I would say, I am standing in life because of you. I stand on your shoulders, and I'm grateful for the things that you risked and dared and experienced, because your gifts have fed the world into which I was born. And I went up and down the aisles, speaking to the bones, and it felt absolutely right. And when I came back to Canada, I thought to myself, a very interesting way to engage that thrust would be to go to every United Church of Canada cemetery between the big city and, say, my cottage in the country, and take 10 minutes in that cemetery among the stones, in silence remembering them, giving thanks for their lives, reading them a psalm, and singing them a little song, and then moving along the way. The first time there would be no one there, and the 10th time no one there. But after about the 20th time, the word might begin to spread. You see, because cemeteries are the most unused places. They are a free space into which we can put meaning. And who knows, the local minister might come and join for one of the 10. Maybe the choir will come out in the afternoon and we sing a song. And in so doing, we uphold the culture from which we've come, the saints whose gifts have given us life, and an encouragement to any families whose forebears are buried. Well, it's just a thought. It's just an idea. And it came from talking to those old Scottish bones in a Scottish cemetery far away. Wherever you are, at the heights, the depths, the crossroads, the inspiration of wisdom comes to you. And it addresses all people. It can be in conversations, or in honest moments, or in moments of sudden surprise. Wherever you are, a moment of sheer wisdom can come. A few years ago, we traveled to the city of Ephesus and saw the beauty of that unearthed city. Right next door, to my mind, there's a little less spectacular offering. It's called the Virgin Mary's house. There was a nun in Austria in the 19th century who had a vision of the Virgin Mary's house in Ephesus, where John took her. She had a vision of a ruin of a house in Ephesus. Can you imagine that? The ruin of a house in Ephesus. Would you expect anything but a ruin of a house? Anyway, archaeologists went, and sure enough, they found the ruin of a house in Ephesus. And it's been built into the Virgin Mary's house. And it's about the size of a garage. And it has an altar to herself at the front, no vanity there. And you walk in the door and you turn right and you're outside again. And then down at the bottom of the hill, they have 3 spigots of holy water. One for health, one for wealth, and one for love. Well, we were with an older crowd, so they were falling all over each other to get to the health one. 2 or 3 were at the love tap, for which they would have to explain to their wives later on in the bus. But my wife and I went to the wealth one. and we took a great big swig of wealth. And then I walked over to a German tourist who was not with us, and I said, "Would you mind lending me 10 euros? He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Well, I just drank from the wealth tap, and I want to see if it's working yet, you see." Well, it was just a little moment, and I'll never see the man again, but there was something that was just an international connection, and we both laughed with each other, and then we went about our separate ways. A little aha moment that links you to the depth of the world. It's quite wonderful. Wisdom is also the first creation, says the Bible, before all our systems and commerce and cultures and land and sea. Wisdom is the park before the theme is added, and it's the wanderlust before the setting out begins, and it's the inspiration deep inside the soul before the melody is written. I notice there's a silence in life, and sometimes the silence speaks so loudly it surrounds you. Have you heard that? We'll go to the cottage sometimes, and we're sitting out on the porch, the two of us, and my wife will say, "Shh." And I'll say, What's happening? She'll go, "Shh, listen. And suddenly the silence looms, it surrounds you. And then a truck goes by or something down the road and it's ruined. But you realize suddenly you've been in the face of this massive silence all the time, and it holds you up. You can feel it against your face. Well, I was up this week for a day or so with friends up where the fires were, just about 100 miles north of here in the woods. And we went to a place called Strath Gorge, and we looked at this waterfall falling and so on. And in the crispness of the day and the sun over our heads, there was a silence, the silence of Australia, and it surrounded us. And it was unforgettable. You could lean on the silence. The first creation before everything else, the surrounding power of the strength of wisdom. And its nature, says the Bible, is to be delightful. Delight tempers everything else. It takes the pompous self-importance out of religion. It takes the sobriety and the bitterness out of portraits of Jesus. It takes fearfulness out of formality. Delight. In the year 2000, people on my street, which has 5 major churches on it, decided to celebrate a week of prayer for Christian unity. We would visit each other's churches for 10 minutes all the way down the street, ending at the Anglican Cathedral for a big service. We started in the Greek Orthodox Church up the street. Several folk gathered, and the priest stood up and said, "You are welcome in our church," to which 20 of his own members in the gallery stood up and shouted, "No, you're not." So much for the beginning of the Week for Christian Unity. As the group was leaving, the police were beginning to set up the barricades next to the church. We headed down to the German Lutheran church, and in there, greeted in German, we sang a little Lutheran hymn, and out the door, the crowd was swelling from the Greek Orthodox heading our way. We went to the Roman Catholic Cathedral next, and there were met by the cardinal and the 2 crucifers and candle bearers. There was a little blessing given, and then it was our turn. One of the men who was out in the lead came screaming into Metropolitan Church and said, "There are 300 people behind me, led by a cardinal in full robes." I'd had one small group meeting happening, and I said to them at the end, "I have no idea what this is going to be like. Would you just stay around to be part of the greeting?" Well, in they all came. And the chair of our board, who was a woman at that time, began to welcome them and said a prayer and sent them on their way, and off they went to the Anglicans. And at the end of it, we shook our heads and said, there is something really delightful about this chaos. Can you imagine that? Fisticuffs at the Greek Orthodox and moving through the German and then to the Catholic, all on our street. I haven't gone out of my building since that day. It's a bit dangerous, but there's something absolutely delightful about that. Wisdom is at its heart delightful. And I was thinking about the things that have been delightful for me among you. The smiles and remembrance of last Sunday when you greeted us outside on St. Michael's Walk. Now, this isn't setting you up for today that you have to do the same thing, but it was quite wonderful simply to be remembered. And the music, the wonderful St. Michael's music, you just carry it in your heart. I may hum one of your tunes to the person sitting beside me on the plane on Tuesday, which will make an interesting trip for 15 hours, won't it? And lunch with old friends, and sitting at a table next to folk from St. Michael's who are having lunch together after the service, and they're obviously delighting in each other. and meeting a very old man who was a member of the Royal Air Force and who stood up for all of us in the battles in Europe. And I was able to take him by the hand and to say thank you for giving me the world that I have inherited. A lovely, delightful moment. And on the way over here one day, crossing the St. Kilda Road bridge, two green-backed parrots with red on their chest sat on a light standard and talked to me for 10 minutes in Australian parrot. They sat there and chatted to me, and I was absolutely rapt. And then they lost interest in me because I speak parrot with a Canadian accent, so they all flew. But I thought, where in the world does that happen? It's such a delightful little moment. I'm going to tuck those little birds away. And the click of the little green man at the crossing lights, I'd forgotten about that. And the clang of the trams as they go up and down the street. And the savoring of sweet cake yesterday in a holiday town with Victorian buildings in it. And meeting Hurley Boy, the Green's dog. Hurley Boy. He laid down at my feet and put his head on my shoes and sat there the whole time I was there. It was so wonderfully restorative, absolute delight everywhere. Now, when I cross the border to live in my big world, dare I trust this delight to be the daily language of the world? Dare I trust it to keep me safe, in touch with creation, on the sacred road to God? Dare I trust it? My sister-in-law has been a French teacher and a guidance teacher for many, many years. She retired about 2 years ago, has just turned 60. And her life was settling down to some kind of retired normalcy when she received a letter from a school in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. And they said to her, would you come in September and give us a year of your life doing guidance for our young women who are moving to the university level of their lives? Well, the cat's among the pigeons. What are you supposed to do with your family? What are you supposed to do with your commitments, your husband? So she came and talked to me for a while, and we spoke about that life is sometimes like a series of trapezes. You swing on one, and then all of a sudden another one's coming towards you, and you know it has your name on it, but you have to let go of the first one to grab the second one, and that can be the most terrifying thing. Well, she sorted it out, and she made the decision to go, and in a few months, she's off to Switzerland for a remarkable year. But the next day, she sent me a little sheet of paper called The Fear of Transformation, and this is what some of it says. Most of the time I spend my life hanging on for dear life to my trapeze bar of the moment. It carries me along at a certain steady rate of swing, and I have the feeling I'm in control of my life. I know most of the right questions, even some of the right answers, but once in a while, as I'm merrily or not so merrily swinging along, I look out ahead of me into the distance, and what do I see? Another trapeze bar swinging towards me. It's empty, and I know, in the place in me that knows, that this new trapeze bar has my name on it. It's my next step, my growth, my aliveness coming to get me. In my heart of hearts, I know that for me to grow, I must release my grip on the present well-known bar and move to the new one. Each time it happens to me, I hope, no, I pray, that I won't have to grab the new one, but in my knowing place, I know that I must totally release my grasp on the old bar, for some moment in time must hurtle across space before I can grab onto the new one. Each time I'm filled with terror. It doesn't matter that my previous hurtles across the void of knowing have always made it. Each time I'm afraid that I will miss, that I'll be crushed on the unseen rocks in the bottom chasm between the bars, but I do it anyway. Perhaps this is the essence of what the mystics call the faith experience. No net, no guarantees, no insurance policy, but you do it anyway because somehow to keep hanging on to that old bar is no longer on the list of alternatives. And so for an eternity that can last a microsecond or 1,000 lifetimes, I soar across the dark void. The past is gone, the future is not here yet. It's called transition. I've come to believe that it's the only place that real change occurs. I mean real change, not the pseudo-change that only lasts until the next time my old buttons get punched. That's a good piece, isn't it? Isn't it? Thank you. Well, I'm crossing a border soon, and will bid you farewell and pull on my ear, as Carol Burnett did. And all of us will cross borders from that which is small and safe into the big world out there. Anything to declare? Well, I have. We are one. My heart is full. The road ahead is safe, and its deepest language is delight.